this cube that's 2 inches on a side. I had seen a picture of it before. That was in the German nuclear reactor project.
A mysterious phone call sparked a decades-old enigma, reigniting a chilling mystery that had been dormant since World War II. A physicist received a small dark cube with a cryptic note revealing its Nazi origins. The cube's weight, coldness, and radioactivity hinted at a sinister past. It was one of 664 uranium cubes crafted by Hitler's scientists in their pursuit of nuclear dominance. But the cubes vanished after the war. Now they're quietly resurfacing in unexpected places, raising haunting questions. Where are the rest? Who has them? What is their purpose? And why are scientists worried about them? The cube that started it all. On a hot August day in 2013, physicist Timothy Coe, an associate research professor at the University of Maryland, was out for a jog when he received an unexpected call from a longtime friend who insisted on remaining anonymous. The friend urged Coe to meet him immediately at a nearby parking lot, piquing his curiosity. Arriving at the designated location, Coe found his friend waiting beside a car. The friend opened the trunk, revealing a small satchel. Inside, wrapped in paper towels, was a heavy dark metal cube roughly 2 inches on each side. The cube's weight was surprising for its size, and its surface bore a charcoal black hue with small notches along the edges. Accompanying the cube was a note reminiscent of a ransom message, which read, "Taken from Germany from the nuclear reactor Hitler tried to build. Gift of Neininger." Coe, a collector of nuclear memorabilia, immediately recognized the significance of the object. He suspected it was one of the uranium cubes produced by Nazi Germany during World War II as part of their attempt to develop a nuclear reactor. In 1945, Nazi scientists were trying to manufacture a working nuclear fission reactor. These cubes were part of an experimental setup in Hageloch, Germany, where scientists including Werner Heisenberg strung together 664 uranium cubes in a chandelier-like arrangement, suspended in heavy water to achieve a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction. Approximately 700 cubes were used in submersion water. Intrigued by the cube's provenance, Coe embarked on a research journey to trace its origins. He discovered that the note's reference to Neininger likely pointed to Robert D. Neininger, a metallurgist who had worked on the Manhattan Project. Further investigation revealed that Neininger had once possessed a uranium cube, which he had given to a friend. Company's quest led him to collaborate with Miriam Hebert, a doctoral candidate at the University of Maryland. Together, they began to conduct analyses to confirm the cube's authenticity and its connection to the Nazi nuclear program. What they discovered next was truly worrying. This unexpected encounter with a relic from a dark chapter in history not only reignited interest in the Nazi nuclear program but also brought to light the mystery behind the origin of these uranium cubes. Before the bomb, how pre-World War II science discovered nuclear power. In December 1938, a groundbreaking scientific discovery quietly changed the course of history, though very few understood its implications at first. German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann were conducting experiments in Berlin, bombarding uranium atoms with neutrons when they noticed something strange. Instead of producing heavier elements as expected, their uranium samples split apart into lighter ones such as barium. At first, they were puzzled and unsure of what they had stumbled upon. Hahn wrote to his longtime colleague and friend Lise Meitner, an Austrian physicist who had recently fled Nazi Germany because of her Jewish heritage. Meitner, now in Sweden, reviewed Hahn's results with her nephew Otto Frisch, a physicist, over the Christmas holidays of 1938. The two realized what had truly happened. The uranium nucleus had undergone fission, splitting into two smaller nuclei and releasing an enormous amount of energy. Meitner and Frisch published a paper in early 1939 explaining the physics behind Hahn and Strassmann's findings. The world of science, and eventually the world at large, would never be the same. The release of energy during nuclear fission was staggering. Using Einstein's famous equation, E=mc², Meitner and Frisch calculated that the loss of even a tiny amount of mass during fission translated into a massive amount of energy. This meant that, in theory, a chain reaction of fission events could create an explosion more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen. Physicists across the world immediately recognized the significance of this. Among them was Niels Bohr, a Danish Nobel laureate who brought the news of fission to the United States in January 1939, just as tensions in Europe were escalating toward full-blown war. That same year, physicists in America began replicating the experiments and confirming that uranium-235, a rare isotope of uranium, could sustain a chain reaction if properly refined and controlled, breeding more fissile material, plutonium-239 and uranium-233, than the original fissile isotopes. But the timing couldn't have been worse. Adolf Hitler had already annexed Austria, and war clouds loomed over Europe. Germany, home to some of the world's best scientists, many of whom were Jewish and had already fled, now seemed poised to exploit this powerful new science. A terrifying question began to haunt physicists. What if Nazi Germany was the first to build an atomic bomb? This fear triggered urgent secret conversations among scientists, especially in Britain and the United States. In March 1939, Hungarian physicist Leo Szilard, who had long feared the military potential of nuclear energy, began writing letters warning governments of the danger. By August 1939, he had co-written a now famous letter with Albert Einstein to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning that Germany might be working to develop nuclear weapons. Roosevelt responded by establishing the Advisory Committee on Uranium, a small government body that would later evolve into the massive Manhattan Project. Meanwhile, in Europe, Britain quietly began backing its own nuclear research program, known as tube alloys, though progress was slow due to wartime resource constraints. In Germany, the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute in Berlin started conducting research on uranium and chain reactions under the supervision of physicists like Vera Heisenberg and Kurt Debner. Initially, the full scope and urgency of nuclear research weren't clear to governments. The science was complex, and the industrial infrastructure to enrich uranium or produce plutonium didn't yet exist. But by the early 1940s it became evident that nuclear fission wasn't just an exciting new branch of physics, it was a potential weapon of unimaginable power. As Europe descended into war, the scientific world split in two. Some raced to build a bomb while others worried about the consequences of such a weapon ever being used. But in Germany, something secretive and dangerous had begun. Fueled by the discovery of nuclear fission and driven by Nazi ambitions, a mysterious program quietly emerged, the Nazi nuclear program and the race for the atomic reactor. In the shadowy laboratories of Nazi Germany, hidden from the chaos and destruction of World War II, a small group of elite scientists pursued something powerful. This was something they believed could change the fate of the war. It wasn't a bomb, at least not directly. It was a machine, a nuclear reactor. Germany's nuclear program began quietly in April 1939, just months after the discovery of nuclear fission and mere months before Hitler invaded Poland and triggered the war in Europe. At the helm was Vera Heisenberg, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist known for his work on quantum mechanics and the uncertainty principle. Alongside Kurt Debner and other notable German scientists, Heisenberg led what would come to be known as the Uranrein or Uranium Club, Nazi Germany's secret nuclear project. While the Allies, particularly the US and Britain, would later focus on building an atomic bomb, Germany's nuclear scientists initially aimed at a different goal: building a functioning nuclear reactor. The idea was that a reactor could produce plutonium, an alternative to uranium-235, which could then be used for a bomb. But first, they had to figure out how to create a sustained nuclear chain reaction, which was a self-perpetuating release of energy from splitting uranium atoms. To do this, they needed two key materials: uranium, the fuel, and heavy water, the moderator. Heavy water, deuterium oxide, slows down neutrons just enough to increase the chances of fission in natural uranium, which contains only about 0.7% of the fissile isotope uranium-235. This is where the uranium cubes come in. Germany's scientists created solid cubes of natural uranium, each about 2 inches on a side, weighing roughly 5 pounds (2.3 kilograms). They were forged into nearly perfect shapes designed to be suspended in heavy water inside a reactor core. These cubes weren't weapons, but they were essential parts of an experimental nuclear reactor that, in theory, could eventually lead to weaponizable materials. In total, 664 uranium cubes were manufactured. The largest single stockpile, around 400 cubes, was used in the most advanced Nazi reactor experiment conducted in Hagelosh, a small town in southern Germany. There, in the basement of a church tucked under a medieval castle, Heisenberg and his team constructed their last and most sophisticated reactor design. The cubes were hung by wires in a spherical formation and submerged in heavy water, creating a lattice intended to support a chain reaction. But the reactor never went critical. The Nazis had neither enough heavy water, due to sabotage by Norwegian resistance fighters at the Vimork plant in Norway, nor enough time. As the Allies closed in, German scientists dismantled their lab and buried key parts of the reactor in a hidden shaft, hoping to keep it from falling into enemy hands. By the time the war ended, not a single Nazi nuclear reactor had gone critical, and the Germans had not come close to developing an atomic bomb. But at the time, the fear of Nazi nuclear capabilities ran deep. British and American intelligence worried that Germany might be months ahead in the race for the bomb. This fear spurred the creation of the Manhattan Project, an effort that would ultimately succeed where the Nazis failed, but at a terrible cost to humanity. The uranium cubes became relics of that failed Nazi effort. But one thing is certain, those 664 uranium cubes were real, and they were created with the single purpose of unlocking the power of the atom for Hitler's war machine. So how then did Hitler's cube resurface in a parking lot in Maryland in 2013? But here's the unsettling part, the Allies did get their hands on the cubes. And what happened next is where things start to get weird. They were boxed up, shipped to America, and then some of them just vanished. And that's where the story takes a darker turn. Let's go back to 1945, to a secret mission designed to stop Hitler's scientists before it was too late, the Alsos mission and the race to stop Hitler's nuclear project. As World War II drew to a close, Allied forces weren't just fighting to defeat Hitler's armies, they were racing to secure one of the most dangerous secrets of the war, Nazi Germany's nuclear ambitions. Though most of the world would only learn about the atomic bomb when it was dropped on Hiroshima in August 1945, the effort to develop it had been quietly underway for years under the name the Manhattan Project. One of its lesser-known branches was Operation Alsos, a mission designed to hunt down and capture the remnants of Nazi nuclear research before they could disappear forever or fall into Soviet hands. This was how the 664 cubes got scattered. Alsos, the Greek word for grove, was a nod to General Leslie Groves, head of the Manhattan Project. This special operation was not just a military effort but a scientific scavenger hunt. Led by physicist Samuel Goudsmit, a Dutch-American expert in quantum physics, the operation included soldiers, spies, and scientists who followed closely behind the front lines, combing through universities, laboratories, factories, and hidden bunkers across Europe. Their objective was to uncover what the Germans knew about nuclear fission, seize any research and detain the scientists involved. By April 1945, Nazi Germany was crumbling. US troops were pushing deep into Nazi territory, and the Alsos team was close behind. It was in the quiet town of Haigerloch in southern Germany that they made one of their most significant discoveries. There, hidden in a cave beneath a medieval church, the team found the last operational reactor experiment conducted by Heisenberg and his team. Suspended from a wooden frame were 664 uranium cubes, each roughly 2 inches in size, arranged like a wind chime in a spherical configuration. The cubes were meant to be submerged in heavy water, forming a core where a self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction could occur. But the reactor was never completed. There wasn't enough heavy water, thanks in part to successful Allied and Norwegian sabotage of the German heavy water plant in Vimork, Norway, and the reactor had not gone critical. The Alsos team quickly seized the uranium, dismantled the equipment, and arrested key German scientists, including Werner Heisenberg. The seized cubes were transported to the United States along with documents, lab notes, and other materials. Some of these scientists were later held in the UK under Operation Epsilon, where their conversations were secretly recorded at a country estate to assess how close the Germans had come to building a bomb. The verdict was clear: the Nazis were nowhere near producing a nuclear weapon. They had been slowed by disorganization, limited resources, political interference, and a lack of urgency. Their scientific understanding of reactor design was also flawed in key ways. Now the uranium cubes were in Allied hands, and the US was winning the war. But what happened to the uranium cubes after the war, and why are some still missing? Where did all the uranium cubes go? After the Alsos mission secured the Nazi uranium cubes in April 1945, they gathered up 664 solid blocks of natural uranium, which was more than enough radioactive material to send shivers down the spine of any nuclear security expert today. These cubes, taken from the reactor under the church in Haigerloch, were carefully boxed up by Allied troops and shipped across the Atlantic to the United States. But what happened next is a story of both scientific curiosity and bureaucratic neglect. At first, some of the cubes were studied as part of the US's own growing nuclear program. Researchers were curious to learn more about German engineering and to test the purity and structure of the uranium. A few cubes were likely melted down or repurposed for further nuclear experiments, but many others were simply put away. No official inventory was ever made public. There was no clear record of where all 664 cubes ended up. Some were distributed to government labs. Others were handed out as keepsakes to scientists or military personnel involved in the war effort. Over the decades, the trail of these uranium relics went cold. Now they're quietly resurfacing in strange places. A few were found in university collections, tucked away in radiation storage cabinets, often with no labels or explanation. At one point, a cube turned up in someone's desk drawer at the Department of Energy. Others were uncovered in private basements, long forgotten by their owners. One even popped up at a Maryland garage sale. Today, researchers estimate that fewer than 20 cubes are known to still exist in public or scientific hands. Most of the others, hundreds of them, are unaccounted for. The mystery of the missing cubes raises unsettling questions. Where are they now? Who has them? Have they been lost to history, or are they quietly sitting in a box, waiting to be discovered again? And this is exactly why scientists like Timothy Coeth, who now owns one of the cubes himself, are tracking them down, to bring closure to a Cold War ghost story and to make sure that one of the darkest chapters in science doesn't unexpectedly come back to life. Coeth's hunt for the Nazi cubes. When Timothy Coeth, a physicist and historian of science, received the mysterious uranium cube in 2013, he had no idea that it would launch a decade-long investigation into one of World War II's most obscure and unsettling scientific legacies. That single dense blackened cube, that was cold to the touch and unmistakably radioactive, would become the cornerstone of a modern effort to track down the 664 uranium cubes created by Nazi Germany during its failed push to develop nuclear energy. Coeth didn't embark on the search alone. He partnered with Miriam Hebert, a fellow physicist and materials scientist who shared his fascination with the intersection of nuclear history and materials research. Together, they began a methodical, science-driven quest to find the cubes, verify their authenticity, and unravel the untold story of their strange post-war journey. The first challenge was determining whether Coeth's cube was the real thing. While its size and radiation signature matched descriptions from historical documents, the pair needed scientific proof. Using radioisotope testing and gamma spectroscopy, they analyzed the cube's chemical fingerprint. Since uranium decays in a predictable way, they could compare the isotopic ratios and trace how long it had been processed, and by what method. Their tests confirmed it. The cube almost certainly originated from the Nazi program, likely manufactured around 1943 to 1944, and possibly came from Heisenberg's final reactor setup in Haigerloch. Encouraged by this discovery, Coeth and Hirt began reaching out to museums, national laboratories, private collectors, and even international institutions. They wanted to locate other cubes, confirm their origins, and build a database of surviving specimens. Along the way, they found cubes in some odd places, one held by the Los Alamos National Laboratory, another at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, a few in university collections, and even one that turned up at a science museum in Germany. But just as often, they found fakes. Many non-reactive replicas were created for educational displays and attempts at fraud. Some people thought they had real Nazi uranium but had unknowingly purchased a copy. Coeth and Hirt became the de facto authorities on verifying cubes, often called in to test authenticity. Each cube, they realized, tells a different story. Some had been shipped directly from Germany to the US after the war. Others were traded or quietly passed between scientists. A few, worryingly, had no clear chain of custody at all. Kuth and Hirt eventually published their findings, raising awareness within the scientific community and sparking interest from historians, journalists, and even nuclear regulators. Their work has brought to light a forgotten part of World War II and revived modern concerns, because these cubes aren't just relics, they're radioactive materials with unclear ownership scattered across the globe. The idea that possibly hundreds of these cubes are unaccounted for is deeply unsettling. To Hirt, they were not just chasing history, they were tracking nuclear material. And that precisely is why scientists are worried. But here's where it stops being just a historical mystery and starts becoming a real-world concern. Because if even a handful of those 664 cubes are still out there, unaccounted for, uncontained, and unnoticed, then this isn't just a Cold War footnote, it's a modern security risk. Let's look at why experts are sounding the alarm, why scientists are worried. These cubes were forged in the darkest days of World War II, crafted for a Nazi nuclear reactor that thankfully never went online. But now, decades later, some of those very same uranium cubes from Hitler's atomic project are quietly resurfacing, and instead of curiosity, they're igniting deep concern among nuclear experts. The truth is that they are growing increasingly alarmed. This is bad news. After all, we're not talking about enriched uranium or plutonium, but these cubes are made from natural uranium, which is far less radioactive and can't explode on its own. One cube handled with care isn't especially dangerous, but that's not what worries scientists. It's what the cubes represent and what they could become. Here's the hard truth: natural uranium is the first step in the long chain of nuclear weapons development. It can be enriched through centrifuges or other technical processes into weapons-grade uranium, which is what powers atomic bombs. While that process is extremely complex and requires resources most terror groups don't have, a rogue state or organized network could, in theory, collect and repurpose the raw material, setting off a slow but deadly chain of events. Even if not for a bomb, uranium can be used in dirty bombs. Such devices combine conventional explosives with radioactive substances to spread contamination, fear, and mass panic. Now add this to the equation. Of the original 664 uranium cubes made for Hitler's reactor, fewer than 20 are confirmed to still exist in public or scientific hands. That means more than 600 have vanished. No registry, no oversight, no idea where they are. Some were likely melted down after the war. Others may still be buried in forgotten labs or storage units. They could be anywhere, in private collections, in dusty garages, or worse, slipping into the black market without anyone noticing. That's what truly scares nuclear watchdogs. In today's world, where nuclear security is under increasing pressure and the global appetite for dangerous materials hasn't gone away, even a 5 pounds cube of unmonitored uranium matters. Every piece of missing nuclear material is a potential vulnerability, a crack in the armor. To Timothy Coe, who holds one of the few confirmed cubes, the danger isn't just theoretical, it's personal. These aren't just museum relics, he warns. They're active pieces of nuclear history, and they're not all accounted for. And that's why scientists are worried. Because when 600 radioactive cubes disappear from history, it's not just a mystery, it's a warning. Cubes that launched the nuclear age. In the final accounting of World War II, most historians and scientists agree on one point: Nazi Germany was never close to building an atomic bomb. Their nuclear program was riddled with setbacks, disorganized leadership, inadequate funding, and a fractured scientific community plagued by ideological bias. The regime's insistence on purging Jewish science meant pushing out many of the brilliant minds who could have advanced the project. Instead of uniting behind a single clear goal, German scientists argued over theory, lacked the materials to scale their work, and focused more on reactors. Would you like this formatted into a document or prepared for publication? Then weaponization. As a result, the 664 cubes are a lesser-known footnote in World War II history. But not everyone sees the cubes as a mere footnote. Timothy Coe believed the danger wasn't in what the Germans actually accomplished but in what the world feared they might accomplish. In Cath's view, the real impact of the Nazi nuclear program lies not in its success but in the terror it inspired. And that terror had real consequences. In 1939, before the war even fully ignited, Albert Einstein and physicist Leo Szilard wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt warning that Germany might be trying to build an atomic bomb. That letter, based on reports from Europe and the growing understanding of nuclear fission, sparked American interest in nuclear weapons. It eventually snowballed into the Manhattan Project, the most expensive and secretive scientific program in U.S. history and the one that would produce the first atomic bombs. Although the Nazis never developed a nuclear bomb, the fear that they could have done so was sufficient to initiate the nuclear age. It's a bitter irony. In trying to prevent a German bomb, the Allies created one of their own, one that would be dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, forever altering the world's understanding of power, war, and science. To Coe, the beginning of that story doesn't lie in a desert test site or a fiery explosion. It begins much earlier, in a dark cave beneath a castle in Haigerloch, where 664 uranium cubes once hung in a silent attempt at a chain reaction. Though the cubes never triggered a bomb, the panic they caused shaped everything that followed. It started with the cubes, and that's why what seemed like a failed experiment is actually a forgotten spark that began the atomic age. Should we be worried about nuclear relics still floating around in private hands? Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.